morning, or hello, I'm Larry Albert. I am 72 years old. I was born April 8th, 1933 at the old Emmanuel Hospital here in Omaha, Nebraska. Far back as I can remember, my grandparents were Harry and Bessie Wallner, and I remember my grandfather's father, who we simply referred to as the Zadie, and a nice white long beard, and he and I were good buddies. I think he must have died when I was about 5 years old. My grandparents came here, the Wallners, by the way, their Russian name was Wolokhyansky, and as an aside, supposedly some prominent people are related. That is Mike Wallace, the news commentator, Eli Wallach, the actor, and some other notable figures. Anyway, they came here. My grandfather, as was typical at the time, came here to avoid service in the Tsar's army. And I think it was about 2 or 3 years later, because he was already married, he sent for my grandmother. And they had 4 children, three girls and a boy, just like is in my family. And most of them, I think all but one, were born in the old country and then came over here. And that was the beginning of the Albert family in the food business, because my grandfather had a grocery store that actually was a grocery store and feed store on North 16th Street. And he owned and operated that store for a number of years. His children went on to bigger and better things and became scattered. They were all around the country. Probably the most notable one was my Uncle Dave, who it's been told that I look a lot alike. He became a major insurance examiner for the state of New York. I think he had quite a powerful position in that if you didn't pass his test, you couldn't sell insurance in the state of New York. In any event, that was the family. This was on my mother's side. My father's side actually didn't have that quite the same background. Again, my father came here as a youngster. I think in like 1910 or 12, somewhere in there. He was about 12 or 14 years old, and he came here and actually came originally to Ellis Island, and then they transshipped him to Galveston, to Texas. And in Galveston, his actual port of entry, his name was something like Auerbach, and the immigration officer said spell it. He couldn't spell it. He couldn't write it or anything. So the immigration officer said, "Well, let's make it Albert. That's easy, and it'd be easy to remember." So that's how the name Albert arose, the Anglo-Saxon name Albert. Anyway, they shipped him to Omaha because in Omaha there were opportunities for unskilled foreigners such as himself, mainly in the packing houses. But my father was a very soft-hearted individual, and it just absolutely destroyed him to see how animals were killed. And so he only worked there for 3 days and he quit. And he found a job in a grocery store, and here we go back into the grocery business in South Omaha. And I think his pay was something like $5 a month. And his main job was to get up at like 3 in the morning and open the store so that the packing house workers who started the early shift could get their tobacco and whatever else they needed to get them going for the day. So that was his job, to get up and do that. And he was a hard worker, and he saved his money, and he had it like in a sock under his mattress, and saved up, I think he said $10 or $15 after months of work. And lo and behold, somebody stole it. So that was one of his first bad experiences in this country. But a few years later, he was drafted in the Army. This was World War I, and he went into the service, got as far as Camp Dodge, Iowa, and at that time there was a worldwide epidemic of dysentery. I guess we'd call it the flu today. And it was a lethal dose that so many people had, and many died, and he was hospitalized. And the Army had a rule: if you didn't eat what was put in front of you, you'd be severely punished. And he was so sick he couldn't eat. And he said he paid a guy next to him to eat his meals so that he wouldn't be punished for not doing so. He got out of the Army in 1918 when the war was over, and bought a little grocery store in South Omaha, and subsequently moved from that to another small store and kept moving up to a point where he bought a building on 35th and Leavenworth, and that became his first real, what was known in those days as a supermarket. Today it would be simply a large convenience store. And he remained in that business for 35 years, 27 years on that corner. And he had, there were three exceptional stores in Omaha at that time. Louis Summer, Fred Buffett, and Louis Alberts. Those were the three top stores. And people knew them for their excellent produce, for their meats, for service, and all those things that sophisticated customers require. His customers were well-traveled, and they were always asking him for something new and different. And one of the areas they seemed to focus on was salad dressing, because at that time there were only three dressings on the market. I think Kraft had a French dressing. There was what they called boiled dressing, which was the forerunner to Miracle Whip, and a couple others. And so my mother made an oil and vinegar Italian-style dressing at home. Used to make it in a quart mason jar. And he took that and bottled it, a few bottles, and gave it out to his customers, and they loved it. And so he figured, well, I'm going to start making this stuff and just selling it to them instead of giving it away, which he did. And he would make a few bottles at a time and put them on the shelf, and his customers liked it, as I said, and then they would come back and say, well, okay, we want some other varieties. So he used, which I still have, by the way, a 1940 Betty Crocker cookbook, and he found some recipes in there, and he started making dressings. And he would make up a bottle or a variety, and he'd give it away, and then when he had enough consensus of opinion that it was good, nothing else needed to be done, he'd put that on the shelf and start on another one. And that was the start of the Albert Salad Dressing Company. And actually in 1939, those were where our roots go back to. Just carrying this a little bit further, he built a room in the back of the store in the early 40s, and I think it was 15 feet long, about 6 feet wide. And he said to me, this is where we're going to make salad dressing. So I used to go down on the weekends and after school, and we'd make salad dressing there and put it on the shelf. And then other stores began getting calls for it, and we started making more and more. And Dad came to me and he said, okay, he said, whatever comes off of this, he said, we're going to use it to pay for your college education. I thought that was pretty neat. One thing led to another, and in 1949 he sold the store and decided to go into this full time. And he came home one day, and I'll never forget it, and he showed me a label, and it said Louis Albert and Son Foods Company. And so here I was, a 16-year-old entrepreneur. So that's kind of a history of how our company started, and some background as far as the family goes.
I'd like to hear about your siblings, Larry.
Okay, let me tell you about my siblings. First of all, I met my wife she was in 8th grade and I was a freshman. And I met her at Bethel used to have Temple. The old Temple on Park Avenue had a youth night once a month, a Sunday night. And that's where I met her there. And I think there were dancing and, well, a lot of things are pretty tame by today's standards, and that's where we met. And when she got into high school, we started dating. And while I was perfectly willing to make this a steady arrangement, her parents weren't too happy about a particular father, and he said, nothing doing. And so for a year or two, we just dated on and off. And then I think it was probably her sophomore year, and I was a junior now, we started going steady. And I graduated Central High School in '51. She graduated in '52. She went off to school, and the glow of our romance kind of died out a bit for a year or so, and then was reignited after a couple of years of separation. And we got married. We got married in June of 1955, and June of 2005 is coming up. Will be our 50th anniversary. We have 4 children. The oldest is Jim, who lives in Dallas, and he has 3 children, Ashley, Chad, and Drew. At this point, Ashley has just graduated University of Texas. Chad is a freshman at the University of Indiana, and Drew is in high school now. Then along came Susie, our oldest daughter, and she and her husband Mark live in Houston, Texas, and they have a lovely daughter by the name of Megan, who is 11 years old. Next is son Steve. He also lives in Houston. He has 2 children, Michael, who is also a freshman at the University of Indiana, and Lindsay, who has just graduated high school. And finally, Marge, our youngest daughter, who lives with her husband Mark in Albany, New York. All 4 of the children graduated from the University of Texas, and so they're all Longhorns. However, each one started somewhere else initially. Son Jim he went to Nebraska his first year and then went to Texas. Susie went to Arizona State 1 year and moved to Texas. Steve went to University of Southern California 1 year, went to Texas. Marge, who is the youngest and was somewhat of a maverick, said, "I am never going to Texas," and she went to Indiana for 2 years, and then she transferred to Texas. So they all graduated from there. Marge went on to get her master's, and was told of 2 places that offered excellent programs, and one was the State University of New York in Albany, and that's how she ended up there, and married her husband, who is an attorney. And that's the children. I always wanted sons or daughters to come into the Albert business, but that was not to be, and probably just as well because they've all done very well elsewhere. I did sell the business in 1990 to a company that was larger than us. It was in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I wanted to, as long as the kids weren't going to come into it, I said, look, I'm going to sell this because, first of all, I want to work, but I want to get rid of the financial pressure that comes from running a small business, and I want to stay with it and grow with the company. And so I said, if none of you guys are interested in it, then I'm going to go ahead and sell it. I don't want to wait until I'm sick and have to sell it, or your widowed mother has to sell it, and on a fire sale, that kind of thing. And so that's what I did. I sold it in 1990. Continued with the company. In 1996, the company I sold to was acquired by a larger one yet that was owned by Mitsui in Japan. That was an interesting experience, working for a really, really big company where I was just kind of a pimple on the balance sheet. They weren't even quite sure who I was or what I was. And then in 1998, that large company spun off my division to another firm right here in Omaha, and some people that I knew, as a matter of fact, and I stayed with them for 3 years. And so really over a course of about 11 years, I worked under 3 different flags, and had just a wealth of experience of what it's like working for others, having worked for myself or with my father for all those years. Right now, it's 2001, I started a consulting firm, and I do consulting work for others, more or less in the same business that I've done before, in product formulation and packaging and marketing and those kind of things that I did for myself. Now I'm doing it for others, and that's kind of brings me up to date.
Let's go back and talk a little bit about growing up at home with your family.
Well, that was an experience. I had 3 older sisters. Sorry, my oldest sister, Nini, that's her real name was Helene. Nini was at home until 1941. She and her boyfriend decided to get married at the last minute, about 2 weeks after Pearl Harbor. So you can imagine the chaos that was going on at that time, and the wedding went off as planned. My mother put it all together, and it was held in our home on 113 North 54th Street, right here in Omaha. About a year and a half later, my next sister, Shirley, her husband was in the Marine Corps. They decided to get married, and again, the wedding was held in the same house. As an aside, a year ago, we had a family reunion, and we all converged on this house at 113 North 54th Street. If you can imagine a Greyhound bus driving up in front of your house and 40 people all of a sudden on your front lawn, that's what we were. And the owners came out, and it so happens we knew them, and they said, "What's going on? What's going on?" And we told them what it was. And they said, "Oh, that's a great thing. Come on in the house." So some of us went in and looked at the house, and I went particularly to the spot by the fireplace, and I said, both my two older sisters were married here. And that was kind of an interesting note for them, particularly, to know what happened there in the house. My youngest sister, Judy, has been a school teacher and is recently retired. She lives in Beverly Hills. Probably Judy and I were the closest because, if nothing else, the closest in age, but also we were at home when the other two girls were off and married and chasing their husbands around to various military bases and all. So I grew up, I was bar mitzvahed in May of 1946. By the way, I have a tallis that my grandmother gave to my father on the date of my bar mitzvah, and it's embroidered on the bag that holds the tallis. And I've since used this for 2 bat mitzvahs and 2 bar mitzvahs of my grandchildren as kind of a family heirloom, and I tell them the story of how this came to be, and that this was made by their great-grandmother and given to their grandfather on the occasion of my bar mitzvah. So it's got some real family history to it. Growing up was kind of just basic everyday living. I went to a Dundee school, graduated from there in 1946, then to Central High School, and graduated there in 1951, and then went to what was then the Municipal University of Omaha. It wasn't the University of Nebraska at Omaha at that time. Frankly, I didn't have much interest in college because I wanted to get into the company full time, but there was the threat of a draft going on at that time into the service, and I thought, well, I really don't want to get drafted. And at that time, the Omaha U had just the first year, my freshman year, had inaugurated a AFROTC program. So I thought, well, that's a good way to stay out of the draft and get my college education. I went to school in the mornings so I could work in the afternoon, of course, on the weekends. And after 4 years, I came out with the commission in the Air Force and served my time as an officer and a gentleman, and then came back and joined the company full time. And started out, well, I did everything. Not that I was that great, but as a matter of training. I mean, I drove the truck, I swept the floor in the warehouse, I made the product in the plant, and eventually moved up to more of a managerial position, and eventually became president of the company.
Let's talk a little bit about some of the friends that you had going to grade school at Dundee.
Oh, well, there's some guys that literally started out in kindergarten with that have been friends ever since. One of my very best friends, Howard Van, passed away a couple of years ago. We first met on the first day of kindergarten, and we had been best friends for, golly, 50-some years. There's quite a few, most of whom, it was interesting because at that time, you stayed together as a group, and you went through grade school, and you went through high school, and there was a set pattern. You got out, you finished college, you went in the service, you came back, got married, and went into business, usually with the family business. So, I mean, it was just kind of a set pattern. And so many of us did exactly that, some of whom were either since passed away or since have moved away. But it was really a very close-knit group that we had. We were all in the same high school social swing of things. There were 2 organizations at that time. One was the Pi Tau Pies, and the other were the Ronos. And well, there's 3 actually. AZA. Probably the closer groups were the Pies and the Ronos, although they're arch rivals, and either athletically or otherwise, and all vying for the same girls. My senior year, I was president of the Pies, and J. Arthur Nelson decided to really invoke the full meaning of the law of Nebraska against secret clubs. And he called me in the office, and I was hardly an A student, so it didn't scare me a whole lot. But he said, "You guys can no longer meet; you're disbanded, or else I'm going to expel you." So I said, "Oh, okay." So we went underground instead, and continued with our activities, but on a less formal scale is all. And we're able to continue. But, you know, it was good because then a lot of the, where the Pie Top Pies were separate and the Ronos were separate and the ACAs, we became all kind of mixed. And it was better because it put us all in touch with one another, and it worked out very well. It was, I enjoyed it. It was, we had a good time. We were active during the war. We collected waste paper and tin cans, and I remember my mother saving fat from whatever she cooked because they made munitions out of that. And, I remember two instances from grade school. One was we used to have saving stamps drive for the war effort, and they were 10 cents a stamp, and it was kind of like a UJA appeal. One day they had a session in school, and they said, we want everybody to pledge. You know, so this kid said, I'll buy 2 10-cent stamps, this one 3-cent stamp. And me, the big shot, said, I'll take a whole book for $5. And I went home and told my mother that. She about killed me for $5, you know. Another instance, I think I was in 7th or 8th grade. They needed a Christmas tree for our Christmas celebration, and I knew my father had them in the store, and I said, "Oh, I'll give 2 of them." And then I came home and told my dad that. I said, "You got to give 2 trees to Dundee School." He wasn't too happy either. So I was always very liberal with other people's money, but that was just part of growing up, I guess, until I don't know if I've ever learned the value of money, but that was kind of my experience in grade school, and as I say, going on to Central High. I'm still active, as is my wife, in Central High activities. She's been in a number of offices of the Alumni Association. I'm currently chairman of the Historical Committee of the Alumni Association, and we do a lot of things relative to creating archival displays and things like that. And I'm kind of a history buff anyway, so anything old always appeals to me, and it's just kind of been my interest in things.
Let me hear about a day in the life of your mother.
A day in the life of my mother. Well, my mother was an interesting person. She had I guess it'd be described like a wanderlust. She liked to go into buy a home, an older home, and totally redo it, and then live there for maybe 4 or 5 years, and then move somewhere else. And it just seemed like every 5 years we were moving. And it was always, I was always displaced because in between moves we'd move in with my grandmother. So we'd leave one home, move in with my grandmother, so my mother found a new house to go to, and then we'd move there. And that was just kind of her thing. And a few years ago, I was, as I do occasionally, I went out to the cemetery to visit her grave, and I couldn't find it. And I called my sister and I said, "I think Mother's moved again. I cannot find her." But we found her then. But no, she was a generous, giving person, and I enjoyed her guidance and all. And she was a good person. I liked her. I like both my parents. I guess, I don't know, maybe that's unusual, but I really enjoyed both of them.
How about your father?
Here was really the nicest guy in the world. He never had a bad word to say about anybody. He was hardworking. He would, when he was in the grocery business, one of the reasons he was successful is because he took such a personal interest in it. He would go to the city market, which at that time flourished in what is now the old market here, and he would go down there at about 3:30, 4 o'clock every morning, and he had a Chevrolet Coupe, and he would load that up. He'd hand pick his produce for that day that he wanted to have in the store, and then he'd haul it back to the store. And so he became really, had a wonderful reputation for just superb produce. Now, the downside of all that is I never saw him. And he was gone from like 4 in the morning, and the store would close at 6 at night. Time to get home, he's 7:30. And that was 6 days a week. And then Sunday he'd go to the store at about 7 in the morning and come home at 1 or 2 in the afternoon. So we didn't share too many father-son things, but I knew what he was doing, and I appreciated what he was doing, and I knew this was one of the main loves of his life was running that grocery store. And, you know, it's funny, women actually cried when he told them that he was closing up. He wasn't closing, he was selling the store and moving on. It was like just a personal relationship that they had with him, and counted on him for the meat that they ate, for him to pick out a melon that would be just right for Sunday morning breakfast and those kind of things. And he was a very gentle, loving, good man.
Tell me a little about your time in the service.
Well, my time in the service was relatively limited. One of the things I didn't want to do was go into flying training, because that meant an extra year. I was committed to 2 years. So I became, at that time, they really weren't interested in ground officers. And 3 of us out of my entire class were accepted as ground officers rather than flying officers. I think maybe one of the things that convinced them I would not make a good flying officer is I took an aptitude test with silhouettes of airplanes, and you had to identify which way they were flying, towards you or away from. I couldn't tell one from the other. And they said, no, this won't do. So they sent me, they designated me as being a supply officer, and that was fine. And I went, I set a record for the Air Force because my initial reporting date was the same date that son Jim was due to be born. And so I applied for a delay, and I received what I thought was a notice that said, you may report 30 days from now. So that was fine. And son Jim was born, and I left for Francis E. Warren Air Force Base in Cheyenne, and I reported for duty, and they said, well, we don't have anything here on you right now, just stand by. Well, that started a whole scenario of orders and counter orders and remanding orders and changing orders, because they couldn't find where I was supposed to be or why. I ended up with 30 sets of orders. And finally, they said, why don't you go down to the Air Reserve Record Center in Denver and take everything down there, and they'll sort all this out. I said, okay. So I took this stack of papers with me, and I went down. All this time, I'm there in Cheyenne doing nothing. I volunteered. I said, put me to work doing something. I don't want to sit here anymore. Went down to the Air Reserve Record Center, and this woman just shook her head. She said, I've never seen anything like this. She said, tell you what, Lieutenant, she said, go home. Go home and stay there until you hear from us, which I did. I went home, and finally, about 4 weeks later, here comes a new set of orders. Okay, report back to Cheyenne, Wyoming Air Force, Supply Officer School. So I went back there. Now I'm formally enrolled, and I'm in the service. And I had a medical problem that cropped up again. It's something that went back to high school, and I went to see the base surgeon at the hospital there at Francis E. Warren, and he said, how did you ever get in the service? I said, well, I had this problem, but I went to the hospital at Offutt Air Force Base, and the doctor said, well, you can go in or you can stay out, whatever you want to do. I said, well, as long as I'm this far, I might as well go in. So he said, okay. He said, you're not qualified to fly, you're not even qualified for active duty, but you can go. So I went, and this doctor there at Francis E. Warren said, really, he said, you can get out if you want to. I said, no, that's okay, I'm going to stay here. Then my orders came through when I finished school, and it was remote Alaska. And I said, whoa, wait a minute, I don't want to go to, I don't like cold weather. So I went back to the doctor. I said, what's the deal here? He said, well, he said, you can get out if you want to. He said, you don't have to go to Alaska, you don't have to go anywhere, you can go home. I said, well, reluctantly, I said, you guys have spent $25,000 training me to be a supply officer, but I said, I don't want to go to remote Alaska. How about reassignment? He said, nothing doing. You're scheduled Alaska or home. I said, I'm home. And that was the end of my military service, 6 months and 24 days. And the draft law read at that time that you served 6 months or more in active duty. That qualified you for exemption from any further military service. So, and they needed me like a hole in the head anyway. It was another supply officer, good Lord. You know, it was a waste of their time, my time, the government's money, and the whole thing. And that was all over. And I told him, I said, look, I'll cut you a deal. Send me somewhere other than remote Alaska, and I'll stay in. Nope, you're going to remote Alaska. Then I thought later, geez, some poor guy somewhere just got orders going to remote Alaska to take my place. So that was it. That was my military service.
Let's go back and talk a little how the dressing company evolved. You talked about how your father got started. and then how it evolved and how it grew from there.
Well, when we started in 1949, we had a building of 800 square feet at 19th and California. We had one woman who was a mixer, one salesman who operated out of my dad's 49 Chevrolet Coupe, and me, and that was the whole company. And I'll never forget, one day my dad was out of town. I think he and my mother were in California, and I got a call from Sam Steinberg at the Omaha Potato Market, which happened to be about 6 blocks away, and he said, "I need some dressing here." I said, "Oh boy, I'll be glad to bring it to you." The only thing is, I didn't have a car, I didn't have a 2-wheel truck, I didn't have anything. I carried these 5 cases about 6 blocks. I was exhausted afterward, but we got it there. That was kind of typical of what we did. We did anything and everything to build the business. We had 6 products at that time, and we gradually expanded into additional varieties, and then came to realize too that there was a significant business out there in doing products for others. And so we started accepting other projects in which we would make the dressing or sauce or whatever it was and put other people's label on it, and sometimes we distributed it, sometimes they did. And this thing it just kept going like that. We went after 19th of California. My dad bought a building on 13th and Howard, which has since been torn down and turned into a parking lot. It was interesting because at one time this was a speakeasy. It was a 2-story basement and 2 stories, and we spent a lot of time going up and down and not too much going forward. And we stayed there for about 2 years, and then built a plant on 16th and Fort. And we kind of outgrew that and bought a building across the street in. Well, we put on all the additions we could on the existing building. Then we bought the other building in 1980, and so now we had a total of about 50,000 square feet between 2 buildings, and which is not ideal. But if you got to have 2 buildings, having them across the street from one another is probably the best arrangement you can have. We turned one building into strictly for processing, and the other was warehousing and office. And by this time, we also got really big time into the distributing business. Besides our own products that we manufactured, we distributed a number of specialty foods, including at one time we had over 400 varieties of cheese that mostly imports. And matter of fact, the division manager of Safeway called me one day and he said, "We've got instructions from headquarters that we have to put up what's called an aisle of cheese in our store on 120th and Center. We don't have a clue what to do. Can you help us?" I said, "Sure," but I said, "I'm not going to share the business with anybody else. It's either all us or nothing. You got a deal." So we brought in some people from New York, and they gave us the Safeway gave us the parameters of the department and said, "Here, fill it and teach our people how to sell it," which we did. And it was really a marvelous success. And then Safeway said, "Okay, now we want you to go to Boise, Idaho, and Kansas City, Sioux Falls." And I said, "Wait a minute, I can't put anybody on just to be doing this. We'll give this information to others if you can find distributors in that market," which we did. Then, as the business continued to grow, the manufacturing end of it, the distributing end became less and less important, and we needed the space. We didn't want to tie up the money in that. The only thing we really kept was our own label, and we had a complete line of pickles. We had a whole line of olives that were packed in Spain for us. These are all under the Alberts label. We had some dairy products, dips, some cheese and all. And this became our focus as far as distributing non-manufactured foods. And even at that, as the manufacturing end grew more even than we expected, that still further diminished the non-manufactured part of the business. When I sold the company in 1990, the people I sold to didn't have any conception of what this was all about, and they said, "Why don't you just get rid of that distributing and the business and just focus on manufacturing," which we pretty well did. The private label part of the business continued to grow and grow dramatically, and that became. We did about 50% of our business in food service sizes and about 50% in retail. Of the retail, probably 40% was private label, and we had accounts. Well, most of our business came from the Midwest, but we had accounts in Michigan and in Virginia and in California, and also it just kept evolving like that. And at one time we had perhaps, and not that long ago, we had perhaps maybe 300 different labels and different varieties of products that we were making, including probably, I think I counted last time, was like 27 different configurations of containers. This became a bit of a problem sometimes because we were constantly faced with line changeovers. So what we try to do is gang run things. Everything that we needed in, say, an 8-ounce bottle, we would try to run at the same time, or 16 ounce, 32 ounce, or a gallon, or whatever. We had 2 lines, one for food service, one for retail. And we try to gang that, or try and gang like products. If we made French dressing and say there were 3 variations of that, then we try and run all those together. And that was the best that we could do. But we took pride in the fact that we made, from a commercial standpoint, relatively small batches. And this is my father's axiom. He said, you make it small batches, you make it a little at a time, slowly, carefully, use the best ingredients that you can. And he said, you'll never have to worry about sleeping at night. And I thought that was pretty good. That made a lot of sense. So even though we were doing considerably more business than we did when we first started out this thing, we did it basically on the same method that my father developed. The only thing we would speed up would be like packaging, which didn't affect flavor or consistency or anything else, and so we could speed that up. But as far as mixed small batches, maybe I think our largest batch was maybe 150 gallons, which is commercially is not a lot. So if we got an order for say 750 gallons, well, we'd have to do it, like 3-4 times. But that's the way we did it. We'd make that one batch, process it all the way through, and then start over again. And to some extent, we set it up on kind of a continuous basis so that we could be mixing one batch in this vessel, another one was already finished in this vessel, and be bottling that while the next one is mixing. So it was kind of continuous. And that worked out for us.
Did most of these techniques evolve from your work, Larry?
Well, some. We did it together. We were a pretty good team for over 40 years. And towards the end, he pretty well said, "You do it." Not even, I wouldn't even say towards the end. A lot of times he'd say, "You do it," and sometimes he would realize that I was not doing it right. But I think he felt, well, that's the best way to learn, and so he just let me go ahead and have my way. But sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. And I say it was a good experience. It was a good learning experience. Sure.
Tell me a little bit about your wedding.
Our wedding. Well, let's see. We started, it was in Bethel at 49th and Farnham. And that's where I was bar mitzvahed from. That's where all of our family activities had taken place there. I think there was 200 and some people there. I think one of the more memorable things about it was that the day of the wedding, Sunday, June 5th, I woke up about 7:30 in the morning and started throwing up. And I don't know what happened. I must have been nerves, I guess something, but it's been kind of a joke in the family ever since. And I did go ahead with it, even though I was ill and pale and all that. And we had the wedding ceremony there, and then a lovely dinner at the Blackstone in the House and Garden room upstairs on the top floor. It was a beautiful event. And then it was funny because we changed clothes, and my wife had on this beautiful dress, and I had on a snappy sport coat and tie and all that. And this was after the wedding. She got out of her gown, I got out of my tux, changed to this, and for literally 30 minutes, because then we went to the motel that night. That was the end of the time we wore that. We went through all this to get dressed, and it really wasn't necessary. But you had to have the formal goodbye and the pictures, and all of that. And it was really nice. The whole family was together, and the family was quite a bit larger at that time. A lot of people are gone since then. And now, as I say, we're getting ready to celebrate our 50th.
Where did you go on your honeymoon?
Well, we went to one of my most favorite places. Favorite is Las Vegas. I think it's the first. No, I take it back. I was there. One of my a major bar mitzvah present with 13 was a trip to California by myself to stay with my sister out there. And I took the bus. which was a 2.5-day jaunt for a 13-year-old at that time. And one of the stops we made was in Las Vegas. And in the bus station, there was a slot machine, and I was playing it at 13. And I think that's where I got the bug. And I've been back a lot of times since. But anyway, that's where we went. We spent, I think we spent 6 days there, which I wouldn't do today. But it was poolside all through the day, and then 2 shows a night, every night, all through the 6 days. You know, it was quite a pace. But yeah, we had a great time. We went on to California from there. No air conditioning in the car. My wife stripped down to almost nothing, and the truck drivers all had a great view of this as we went by, but it was ungodly hot. And we made frequent stops and all that, but went on to California, stayed there for a few days, and then came back to Omaha. And that was the start of our wedding, or of our history of my life and of Paula's, my wife. I guess the thing that I'd like to address to the children and grandchildren of both Paula and I is that we hope you've enjoyed this, that you understand and appreciate a little of the history of our family and how it came about. Needless to say, we are very proud of each and every one of you, and hope that your lives are as enriched as ours were by virtue of our family and how we all grew up and got along and counted on one another, and how much it means that we all love each other very much, as we do you.